Welcome back. We're now joined by a distinguished guest who has played a pivotal role in shaping U.S. foreign policy over the past few decades. Joining us right now is John Bolton, former National Security Adviser and a prominent figure in international relations. We'll discuss his views on current geopolitical challenges globally, especially in West Asia, also the U.S. role in the region as well. Ambassador Bolton, thank you for being with us here on Global Eye. Let me ask you about the escalating crisis in the Middle East. Netanyahu and Biden have been in touch over the last few days. Do you believe there is consensus between Israel and the United States to retaliate against Iran?
Well, I think there's agreement that retaliation is going to happen and that this time it can be justified. I don't think there's any agreement between Washington and Jerusalem as to what that retaliation ought to be. In fact, just reading the tea leaves, and I admit it's speculation, I don't think Israel has told the United States yet what its principal options are. And as best we can determine, it doesn't look as though the Israeli War Cabinet has yet made a final decision. I think there's distrust between Netanyahu and Biden, and I think, therefore, Israel is not doesn't feel that it should be sharing with Washington exactly what it may have in mind.
Are we close to a full-fledged war?
Well, I don't think so, because I think the Israeli effort here is to inflict enough damage on Iran to make it clear that any further escalation by Iran would be really devastating. And I think that's what Israel is trying to calculate in deciding what its retaliation for the October 1 ballistic missile attack will be. I mean, my own view, it's only my own view, is that Israel should go after Iran's nuclear weapons program, for example, rather than the oil export facilities. Going after the nuclear program is what really threatens Israel and the United States and others for that matter, and doesn't really affect the citizens of Iran. But we'll see. It's a complex decision for Israel.
Right. You've also said that dealing with the Middle East crisis will be a failure if we fail to address Iran. Now, you were suggesting that one option and a good option before Israel is to target Iranian nuclear facilities. But Iran will treat us as an act of war, and it could lead to a full-fledged war in the region. Don't you think so?
Well, you know, on October 1st, the second attack directly from Iranian soil on Israel, the first being back in April with 320 projectiles, about 130 drones, 70 cruise missiles, 120 ballistic missiles, followed on October 1 with 180 ballistic missiles fired from Iran toward Israel. And just to put that in perspective, that is the largest ballistic missile attack in human history. So I would say if you're an Israeli looking at that pattern of behavior by Iran, and knowing that you can't be sure that the next ballistic missile headed your way from Iran might not have a nuclear weapon under the nose cone, this isn't time to fool Iran. Iran has been attacking Israel since October the 7th of last year through its terrorist proxy groups, Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthi rebels, and others. And Israel has endured that for a year. So the war for Israel is already about as wide as it gets.
Right. I'd like to also ask you, how does this war actually impact the U.S. election? Does it really help the Democrats? It's always said that no one wants a war, but how will it impact the Democrats' campaign?
Well, I think the fear in the White House is that the war in the Middle East combined with the war in Ukraine hurts Kamala Harris. And their reasoning is the world looks chaotic, which it is, and they fear that responsibility for the chaos will be blamed on the Biden administration, number one. Specifically with respect to the Middle East, if hostilities continue to rise to a higher level, there's every prospect there could be a spike in global oil prices. That in turn could affect gasoline prices at the pump in the United States and the cost for goods and services that have to be transported. So a price rise right before the election also would be a bad thing for the administration. So on balance, I think it's the Biden administration and Vice President Harris who are most worried about the potential effect.
What could really bring this war to an end in terms of negotiations? And do you think negotiations have taken place in the right earnest in Qatar?
I think people with good motives have tried for negotiations, but honestly, I think Israel is past the point where they're going to negotiate with terrorists. In fact, I would say, as a general proposition, looking at the American negotiation with Taliban under Trump and Biden, that you can't trust terrorists for any deal that you make with them. They may adhere to it for a while because it's in their self-interest, but ultimately they just view a ceasefire as a pause for them to regroup. I think Israel's determined to dismember Hamas and Hezbollah. They're well on the way to doing it. They've got a lot more to do, but they've done a lot already. That's severely weakened Iran in the Middle East, and I think if depending on what Israel's upcoming retaliation for October 1 looks like, Iran's power could be diminished even further. Those are the circumstances under which you might negotiate with Iran, which is really the source of this problem.
Right. Ambassador Bolton, in case Donald Trump wins the election, which is a possibility because the election remains too close to call, Kamala Harris is in the lead, but it is within the margin of error. How would Trump's approach be different compared to Biden right now, to Iran and to the war in the Middle East?
Yeah, look, I think it's very hard to judge because Trump doesn't think in policy terms. He doesn't really have a national security philosophy. He thinks in terms of what's good for him. He has said on a number of occasions he could make peace. He could make a deal with Iran. He came very close to meeting Javad Zarif, who was then the Iranian foreign minister at the G7 summit in August of 2019 in Biarritz, France. He met with Kim Jong-un to talk about the North Korean nuclear weapons program. I could see him meeting with Iran. You just don't know with Trump. What you do know is he will tell you he'll do a lot better than Biden. He won't explain how. Trust him.
I would like to also ask you about the manner in which the attacks have taken place in the last few days. For example, a senior commander of the Iran Quds Force, Ismail Urani, who traveled to Lebanon after Hezbollah killed Hassan Nasrallah. He has not been seen so far. It is believed that he is a Mossad agent, according to some reports. What do you think may have happened?
Well, it's very hard to tell. And I think Iran's latest statement is they deny that he's been killed. But in the chaos that we see increasingly in Beirut now, there's just no telling. I mean, I do think the Israelis and opponents of the regime in Iran have infiltrated both the Quds Force and the Revolutionary Guards in Iran more broadly. And I think that's a sign that the regime in Tehran is not as strong as it may look from the outside. I think there's enormous popular discontent. And I think it's among those discontented Iranians that Israel finds allies who can both carry out espionage and also clandestine activities.
Right. What do you think could be the role of countries like China and Russia in fanning the war in the Middle East, supporting Iran and its proxies?
Well, I think it's a very serious problem for the international community as a whole. I think what's happening at a macro level internationally is there's increasingly an axis being formed between Beijing and Moscow, like the Sino-Soviet alliance of the Cold War, except this time Beijing is the dominant partner. And I think that China's hegemonic ambitions, first along its own periphery in the Indo-Pacific, but then ultimately worldwide, combined with Russia, the outriders like Iran and North Korea and others, is really the big security challenge for the world for the rest of the century. And I think we're seeing it play out in the Middle East right now. It could shift elsewhere, obviously, to South or East Asia.
That's all we have on this edition of Global Eye. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned to CNBC TV 18 for more news and updates.